So, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, at Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make resources such as books and courses and information for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice but maybe don't know where to start or can't find out the information they need. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you, and I can't wait to get started. So let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about tea towels in pottery, like using tea towels in pottery. So this might seem like a totally random thing to be talking about in pottery, but I actually think tea towels are incredible to use in pottery, and there's so many different ways I use a tea towel in my pottery practice. So I was thinking about this. I was writing all the ways down that I use tea towels. I'm going to go through 6 different ways in today's episode. I was just thinking, I wonder if the term tea towel is like, international, or whether it's just like something from the UK. So thought I'd just first of all just describe to you what a tea towel actually is. So yeah, when I'm talking about a tea towel, I'm talking about a cotton cloth that you can get from, like, in the UK you can get them from like supermarkets, like hardware shops, and they're basically like a kind of cotton. They're usually cotton because they're used for like drying dishes in the kitchen. So they're kind of how to describe, like, the length of them is probably about 60 centimeters by maybe like 40 centimeters, and they're hemmed. The weave is usually quite fine. It's usually quite a sort of fine weave. You can get them made out of linen as well, but I prefer cotton ones for pottery. Cotton and clay, cotton cloths and clay are like best friends in pottery. So yeah, and they're just fantastic. They're like usually made of quite a kind of strong fabric, quite thick. They're quite absorbent, but they have a very like flat surface. So they're not like the kind of bath towel that you would get in the bathroom. They're just like a beautiful kind of flat cotton, finely woven cloth that's hemmed. Okay, so that's a detail. And yeah, here's 6 different ways that I use tea towels in pottery. So, okay, this is apart from just drying my hands and drying tools with them. Okay, so the first way that I use them is I actually lay one out, and I reclaim clay on top of it. So I scoop out kind of sloppy wet clay from my reclaiming clay bin, and I scoop it out and I put it actually on top of a tea towel, and then I leave it for a couple of days. And then the tea towel just perfectly absorbs water from the clay, and it doesn't stick to the floor that I've put it on, because the tea towel's there. I can wash that cloth, get all the clay out when I finish reclaiming the clay, and it's the perfect surface for drying clay. I can kind of pull the sides of the cloth up to kind of encourage the clay into kind of one mass in the middle. It's a brilliant way of reclaiming clay. Sometimes I actually will put another cloth on top just to kind of like try and dry out the top surface as well as I'm reclaiming the clay. But yeah, that is one amazing use for tea towels. You can reclaim clay on top of it, reclaim that sloppy wet clay on top of the tea towel. Okay, so on this note, the second way that I use tea towels in pottery is that I actually wedge or knead my clay when I've finished reclaiming it, when I think it's just about the right consistency to turn it back into usable clay. I'll wedge it all up, and then I can store it in some plastic boxes to keep it kind of wet enough to use. But I'll actually wedge it on top of a cloth. So I basically hold the tea towel with one hand, and then I'll just wedge the clay with the other hand on top of the cloth, and this just stops it from like sticking to whatever surface I'm like wedging the clay on, so like table or something, instead of having to like wedge it on the table, it's a tiny bit wet. Often just after you've reclaimed the clay, you're kind of mixing all the slightly wet clay and drier clay that's been around the outside. You're mixing all of that together. It's such a good idea to do it like on top of a cloth, because you just don't have that like clay sticking to the table problem. So yeah, they're absolutely magical for that. They're brilliant. So yeah, if you ever have clay that's like slightly too wet, you can just wedge it on top of a tea towel and it will just be drawing that water out just really gently. It's not going to dry out too fast. And it just enables you to get just the right consistency to be able to then use, to get workable clay back again. So, okay, so those are the first two ways. So, on the kind of clay reclaiming note. And then, okay, so the third way that I use a tea towel in pottery is that I actually use them as rolling cloths. So rolling clay out is again, we don't want it to stick to that table when we're like rolling clay out on a nice flat surface. So we want to be rolling it out on top of a cloth. And in the pottery that I used to do pottery in, when I was learning evening classes, they used to have like various different rolling cloths that you could use. Some were hemmed, some weren't hemmed around the sides. So you kind of get like little strings of the cloth like in your clay. But the really good thing about tea towels is that they are hemmed already. Another thing about the rolling cloths actually we used to have in the pottery class I used to go to was that they had a really like a really big weave to them. So it would mean that when you're rolling the clay out, it would like imprint this pattern of this, this fabric, this fabric on top of your clay. And then, well, like when you're rolling it onto it. So I guess the underneath side. So when you removed the cloth, you would have this like imprint that you would then have to spend ages like sponging out, like at the leather hard stage or something. So yeah, not ideal. So that's why cotton tea towels are so good, because they'll often have a very flat grain to them, tightly woven grain to them, and it means you don't get too much of that like weave type pattern when you're rolling clay out. So they are the perfect size. Unless you're rolling like a huge piece of clay out, they are generally the perfect size for like rolling kind of little projects, little bits of flat clay. Like I make a lot of coasters in my pottery, and they are literally the perfect size just to roll a little bit of clay out on top of. So yeah, rolling cloths, they are amazing. So I'm interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide that I've made just for you about how to fire an electric kiln. So if you have your own kiln and you're not really sure how to program it, or you just want to know more about how kiln firing schedules work and what a kiln firing schedule looks like for a bisque firing and a stoneware glaze firing, this guide is just for you. It will tell you everything you need to know, including all the different terms that are used in kiln firing schedules. And you can get this guide on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. And also the link is in the show notes. So let's get on with the episode. Okay, so the next way that I use them is, oh yeah, this is on the same note actually, because it's like, yeah, because this is how I make my coasters, is that I actually use a tea towel to, in between wet pieces of clay, to kind of help to dry the clay out evenly. So what I'll do is I'll stack the coasters up, and as they're drying, I'll stack them up, and then I need to prevent flat clay basically from curling up. You need to kind of squash it down a little bit as it's drying. So what I do is I stack them up with like tea towels in between them, and then I to help to absorb that water, and then I'll put a slightly heavy object on top just to kind of weigh them all down, dry all the coasters flat whilst they're drying. We want to hold them in that flat position until they're too dry to kind of curl up again. So I sandwich tea towels in between all the coasters so that they can just each one can just dry out the front and the top and the bottom, and that's just a brilliant way of drying flat pieces of clay. Just using a tea towel, sandwich it in between, and then put something kind of slightly heavy, not too heavy, not too heavy, but like slightly heavy on top, just to kind of flatten it down, keep it flat. Um, so yeah, it stops them from sticking together by sandwiching a tea towel in between each one. Okay, so that was the fourth way. And then the fifth way is that this is such a good technique. So I actually use a tea towel you can use a tea towel to make a flat base or a flat rim of your pot. So what I do is I dip the tea towel in water and I wring it out so it's not really, really dry, but not like sopping wet, sort of somewhere in between those two. And I stretch the tea towel over something very flat. So this could be like a wooden board, or any kind of other board that's very, very flat. Or like you could even just do it on top of a table or something, just a very flat surface. Then what you can do is you can take your pot either at the leather hard stage, or you can do this when the pot is like, you can even do it when it's bone dry, and you just twist your pot on top of the cloth. So again, it's great to have a very fine grade. I do, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the right term is. Very fine weave, I suppose, is the right term. Like when a cloth is very fine, and very flat, and you can't really see the individual kind of crossing of the fibers. Very flat cloth. This is a fantastic thing to do when you've got a very, very flat woven cloth. So then you just twist your pot. You can twist the rim of it on that cloth, or you could twist the base of it on that cloth, and it will make an extremely flat base. It's kind of wiping the clay all at the same time and creating this fantastic like flat surface. So sometimes when you make a pot it's like a little bit wiggly, and when you have a very sharp base or a very sharp rim, it can just really make the pot look fantastic. Like, look, just really adds that element of like sharpness to it that just makes it, you can sponge it so it's not you don't want like a sharp edge, like, so you just sponge it back again a little bit, but it just makes it very, very flat, and it just looks so good. So I actually use that technique on pretty much all my pottery to make a flat rim and a flat base. Yeah, tea towels are amazing for that. So what happens when you do that technique is that sometimes the tea towel can become like sort of saturated with clay. So I basically dip it in the water, just wash that clay out, and then wring it out again. And then then it's fresh, and it can just you can use that technique again. So it does get a bit clogged up with clay, like the cloth. So yeah, you just need to wash it, and then you can like do the technique on another pot. Okay, so that was the fifth way, and then the sixth way, the final way that I use, amazing use for tea towels in pottery, is that I actually sometimes use a tea towel to absorb condensation when pottery is drying. So I've spoken about this on the podcast before. I basically often dry my pottery in a damp box, which I don't even know if that's a real name for it, but I just called it that. Basically when I did pottery in evening classes, we used to have things called damp cupboards, and we all used to put our pottery in there from week to week, and it would mean that the pottery was kept nice and damp so we could continue to work on it from week to week. And so so what I do now, I don't have like a damp cupboard. I just have like a plastic box, basically, that it's like a storage box that I just got from the supermarket. And that's how I keep my clay damp. But what often happens when you're drying clay in a damp box is that you'll get condensation. So the water will evaporate from the clay, and then it will kind of condense back in the box. And you often get like water pooling in the bottom. So what I do is I actually put a tea towel in the base of the box so that any condensation is absorbed by the cloth, because you don't want water pooling in the box, because if your clay is drying and you say you have like dry clay, it can then absorb that water again, in areas that you don't want it to, like maybe the base gets very wet and it kind of starts to disintegrate or something. So you want to keep the atmosphere of the box, kind of on a constantly kind of drying state, and you just don't want water pooling in that box. So that's what I use tea towels for in a damp box. And you can even like add a couple more tea towels if you want to dry out the pottery, a bit faster, that those cloths will absorb water, from the atmosphere as the clay is drying. So it's a really good way of drying clay really gently and evenly, when it's in the damp box. Yeah, and I make sure I kind of take the tea towels out and dry them out properly, because they can start to go moldy. Actually, I did have that once, where I left the tea towel in there for too long. But yeah, they just if you have the lid off slightly and you have the tea towel in there, they're going to be just drying so evenly your pottery. So yeah, so there we go. There's the there's the 6 ways, and I'm sure there are like probably hundreds more ways actually you can use tea towels in pottery. But I love tea towels. I think they're fantastic. Such a great pottery tool, massively underrated pottery tool. Like I said, they're already like hemmed for you. They're fantastic. Like they're strong, strong fabric. They're, wonderful. They're wonderful things to use in pottery. So yeah, it's been so much fun like talking to you about tea towels and pottery. And yeah, wishing you very happy potting until the next episode. And until then, I'll see you then. And until then, yeah, enjoy your pottery and see you soon. Okay, bye. Oh, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're interested to learn more about eco conscious pottery or making your pottery more eco conscious and sustainable, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.